Hi, Jack.
Hi.
Hi.
That was, actually, it was really fantastic to see some examples of your work before we watched Acid Plumbing. And there's a different kind of emphasis in each body of work, in your narration in relationship to Peace Staff's piece, and then in some of the projects that you're cultivating. And there were a few terms that came up, like the language you're using, it really stands out. Like there's a kind of repurposing of vocabulary that I really appreciated. So you're making us think about materials that seem as if they're in some relationship to the solid and the fixed. You're asking us to think about them as transferable. And then you use this word irreverent, which when applied to buildings and building structures just has a completely different valence. And then, of course, in relationship to your project that's a collaboration with Ash, there's a kind of desire to make the ephemerality of the experience also part of the architecture. Given all of that, it was hard for me not to think about Paul Preciado's formulation of the countersexual. Yeah, and I wondered whether this resonance of the prosthetic that he proposes as a kind of transsexuality and transgendering built around the formulation of the dildo, the transferable phallus, whether that has any resonance in some of your thinking about architectures and bodies.
I was brushing up on my Preciado for this, yeah. You got me. I mean, just minimally, maybe, sort of, I keep those sort of thinkers in my back pocket, people like P Stuff and yourself and Preciado. I sort of exist more in a world of sort of engineering and kind of material specifications these days. So to escape the kind of extreme utilitarianism or the kind of blindness of utilitarianism, sometimes you have to keep those sort of thinkers back in the back of your mind. So like, Preciado for me performs the role of kind of the admission that they let like capitalism actually run through them through the consumption of testosterone, right? Like when they take on testosterone, the sort of very ideas of the gender binary that they're resisting, but also the kind of capitalist pharmacopornographic ecologies that have been created around these products, ultimately products, are sort of like going through him, and now he's like sort of representing those to the world, right? So he becomes in some ways a kind of a billboard for this kind of like consumables that sort of change us, things that we kind of let in, and we become kind of symbol of, in a way. I also think oftentimes about maybe in the opposite direction, people like Heather Davis, who theorize about the plasticity and the kind of the amount of plastic that is involved in queerness ultimately, and how much queerness plastic has, how many allowances for queerness it has created in the kind of appendages and outfits and shoes, whatever, party spaces, silicone, all of these things that has allowed for a queerness, but then at the same time participates in this kind of oppressing trash haven that we've kind of made out of many parts of the world, but then cycles back to us in a kind of queer form by essentially creating sort of the fertility issues, right? Like microplastics, like essentially creating this kind of fertility issues that relate back to give us a kind of new queerness that is just like much more problematic, of course, and sort of secondary and sort of recycled through us in just the darkest of ways, but has essentially kind of created a less fertile, definite, like so the reproductive solutionism of Wally is shortened or cut slightly. I relate those thinkers very much to just like very substantial like material consequences in the world.
Yeah, and I mean, to me, it's like what you're doing with architecture. It's a kind of architectural theory of what Preciado is thinking about in relationship to the prosthetic. So you was reminding us that in architecture, the building is seen as the great work by the great man, which then leads to a desire for permanent materials, the monument that will never be taken down. So there's an entire logic of masculine permanence that plays out through this, particular relationship to the building. And then, however, when we get to your kit, as you call it, this kit of an understructure that is being used to improvise different forms and different apparatuses, it seems like we're, really in a transing, it's like literally the transing of architectural permanence towards this understructure model. And I really want to hear more about that and how the kit circulates and how it's assembled and how it's taken up by communities. It's just a fantastic idea.
I mean, the kit, it came directly in sort of opposition to canonical perpetuity, as you called it, this kind of enamorment that architecture has with creating kind of, authorial gems, kind of monuments to a kind of singular genius that happened in a kind of napkin, a meeting by some kind of quick thinking, like genius-prone folks that, just kind of then ends up, occupying the center of a city or like whatever, right? So ultimately that kind of perpetuity that creates a gem that honestly they all leak anyway. So, all of these buildings that tried to do a sort of shape or a flat roof, and which is what the architectural canon celebrates, right? Those are the two ideas: formalism and flat roof modernism.
Yeah.
They were like the kind of big, most studied, let's say, created most canon Hall of Famers, let's say. They all leak, and so this idea that like the buildings that are attempted to be sort of that attempt shape then require a lot of kind of caulking and waterproofing, and just everything is a kind of vulnerable surface. They become this kind of mush of materials, so kind of counter, as I was saying before, like they're inseparable, unrecyclable, untransferable. They will always just be that thing that they were originally intended to be. They can't be anything else. And so the kit is just the opposite of that. It doesn't even attempt to be like waterproof, really. Everything is sort of holes and parts that you can assemble whichever way. It can have a canopy or it cannot. You can use it as a kind of way to lift yourself off of the ground, or you can use it as a way to give yourself privacy, your height, or whatever, however you want to interpret it. But it's not presuming that it's going to neither be forever nor sort of be like kind of static and like available even.
Right.
So anyway, it circulates. There's a website. It's it's available to kind of currently to like Detroit metro area. Anybody that wants to use it can come pick it up. It's on wheels. You can roll it away, or like there's wheels as part of it. You can kind of roll it away.
And who has showed up and wheeled it away, and what have they done with it? Do you have any sense of how it travels into the world?
So far it's got like a very limited range. I'm not a sort of, I don't have a kind of audience. I have a very limited sort of audience. So, it's been used to, as I said earlier, like to create a kind of gym in LA. Yeah. It's currently kind of holding an exhibition space for some like a project called Cult, where somebody that I know has a kind of dad who like preaches is a kind of preacher of love, and they're creating a kind of production site for this kind of exhibiting their kind of thoughts. Anyway, it's the most kind of bizarre end of my sort of thinking, but it's been a gym, it's been a place to have like pizza, it's going to be
so
like
all
this
of
kind
those
like,
uses that you listed, it's
exactly what I
actually
listed
been,
before.
people have used it for that.
Yeah.
Ah.
But it aims for more interpretations, and hopefully there will be more.
Yeah, well, one thing that you said that was, it's just so basic but so profound, was that architecture it's not built with its own demise in mind, right? So people are not building an architecture to think about at the end of its lifespan, how will we dispose of this unit? And so to think about the potential for disposability and recyclability it seems almost anti-architectural in terms of the way in which architecture stages its own grandeur. And I really want to hear more about that. I mean, are you part of a kind of, do you feel like there are other people in architectural theory who are pursuing this kind of architecture that can undo itself in an ecologically responsible way?
There's so little theory about it. Like somehow the disassembly part just doesn't, it's found a couple technical manuals here and there. One sort of the most comprehensive one coming out of a kind of like Australian kind of construction industry, which has like this one person that kind of thinks the right way, I would say, maybe, or like, has a kind of propensity towards clever thinking that's not tied to industry necessarily. Like anyway. But it's got very few sort of, its takeoff has been very slow within architecture, with a little bit of footing in like the technical, but certainly not in the theoretical. And ultimately that's why I tend to, lean towards kind of queer theories about parts, assemblages, non-cohesion, sort of all of these things that have sort of seeped through the theories of queerness, but there's no kind of flat carrying like representative of it. So we're hiring. So I don't know.
There was a moment when you were presenting your work where you talked about the possibility of re-aestheticizing something.
Yeah.
And I was really struck by that because, of course, recycling is something that we think we have to do with certain kinds of materials, but we don't think about the aestheticizing, re-aestheticizing, the cycles that art might also go through, both in relationship to utility, but also in relationship to not being productive or useful.
Yeah.
We think of a style as something that is just fixed in relationship to its time, its space, its context. And so that elaboration of re-aestheticization seems, very evocative.
Yeah, I mean, there's, as a kind of base premise, there's that kind of idea that like there's sustainability, at least within architecture, has been a sort of very much a kind of a naysayer, right? Like it mostly names the things that you can't do or that you shouldn't do. And I think like queerness gives me, or I look at queerness for kind of ways of doing that with some joy, or infusing the can'ts with some cans, let's say, and so image in some way does that for me. So the kid is essentially can be re-aestheticized by just changing the sort of surfaces, right? So all flat materials can be reprinted, can essentially kind of flatbed printed with sort of new images, as if it were like a canvas or posters, right, in the street, where you have this kind of layers of shows, kind of forming ultimately a kind of thick stack of events that have happened, but each one is sort of different. So you don't change the whole billboard, you just kind of change the surface, right? So similarly with this kit, you can change the surfaces, you can paint them, you can draw on them, you can do whatever, because they're just kind of flat elements, and all of a sudden the kit looks as you might want, or follows the thematics of your interest,
right,
that maybe have nothing to do with my aesthetics or my interest, but it's now sort of on loan to you, so you can kind of reimagine it. So in some way it avoids the problem of whoever finds utility in something like this, having to like purchase new new posters, new things with like particular aesthetics, or I don't know if it's a quinceañera and you have to, thematize it in balloons and ribbons, or frogs. You can just print them instead of buying like millions of knickknacks of frogs and balloons and ribbons.
But that's really beautiful because it refuses to stamp the material with the artist's signature and make it into a kind of, a text that must always be attached to the artist. It's a kind of gift almost.
Yeah,
so it comes out of a capitalist economy and into some other kind of transfer of value, goods, material, opportunity, aesthetics. And it sets up a relationship between you and unknown collaborators with whom you will never necessarily work or even see, but who are literally influenced in what they can imagine by the kit that you have given them. And there's just like the space between you and your potential collaborators feels really important. Like you don't need to know each other in order to make this intervention into the built environment.
You usually get just like a snapshot of something happening on one of your things, and so it makes sense to you.
Let's have a chat about acid plumbing, and then we'll see what kinds of questions people have. Just tell us a little bit about how the collaboration came about and how you staged the dialogue. I think there's a way, I think what we see is we go into the architecture at the beginning, and then when your part of the dialogue begins, we re-emerge from the architectures. There's a sort of, we go in and we come out, and there's a kind of ebb and flow to the piece that is mimicked both in the conversation about liquidity and the management of fluids, but there's also in there a dialogue about gender and about dysphoria that is never simply being staged as such. And I like the indirection and the implied nature of that. And I wanted to learn more about how you came to this and how you created it together.
I mean, I think in general, P-Stuff talks like just such an incredible kind of calibration of talking about like gender and transness without making it identitarian or sort of making it categorical in a way. I think they sort of see it everywhere, and they kind of glean it from everywhere, a kind of trans condition or a kind of the kind of mutabilities or the kind of dispositions behind transness. They're kind of everywhere for them. So I sort of tend to lean on them for the beautiful calibration of language on that, and which is why I sort of approached them for this project. As I said before, like I exist now in a bit more of a world of engineering. So when I need a jolt of something that's not so like material positivist or growth oriented, I go back to my friendships and see who's doing what. And, Patrick was doing the Serpentine project at the time, and it was just inevitable that I would hit them up for a conversation on kind of erosion and undoing and but also like just so interested in how they kind of turn the building inside out and show us that the leakages and that in some way kind of modernism is not really working for all bodies, and specifically not for trans bodies. So it was a kind of the project was done in like 3 days. It's crazy to think now, but it was like done in 3 days. We just exchanged voice notes, and I forgot the second part of your question, but.
Well, I was, when you walk around in London in particular, on late at night, the pubs have been open for too long. All you smell is urine, honestly. This country smells of urine and alcohol to me.
I'm from the Basque Country, and it also, I mean, we were just back at home, and, woke up a couple mornings in my couple very wholesome days. I woke up at like 6 a.m. and I went outside to the beach thinking that we would have this kind of beautiful morning, like beach time, and it was just like trucks washing away like last night's piss, right? Like it was just like the brushes just kind of like smearing piss and booze kind of all over, while kind of wholesome runners are trying to like do their morning thing. So yeah,
Right.
I don't know.
So, it's because it's ambiguous in the piece, because it's also about like the city putting urine proofing on the wall, and it's like, they want to repel the trace.
Try so hard,
Yeah.
They try really hard.
But at the same time, I mean, who pisses on walls? I mean, female-bodied people aren't so much going around squatting and pissing, maybe behind cars, but this literally this pissing, which is a kind of inscription. We don't even have to say male. I mean, it's just a testosterone kind of inscription on surfaces. It seems to me, I'm almost wanting the urine proofing, So I was interested in that moment where I was so with the narrative, and then I was suddenly not sure where I stood on that.
We can have it both ways. That's we can both want to be repelled and want to piss on it still.
We want to piss on it, but then the actual reality of pissing on it is this, the transformation of the city into the toilet for part of the population. And I know here they sort of wheel out urinals at a certain time of night with the presumption that anyway people are going to piss. So let's just give you a place, and then we know you also have alcohol poisoning, so we'll send around the ambulances later. So there's a kind of enabling of these fluids. As you put it, architecture is the management of fluids, and here it is at the level of the city in relationship to a different set of fluids, how they go into the body, how they come out, whether they come out as piss or vomit, whatever it may be. Yeah. You realize that the human spills its viscera, all over the place in a way that requires this management that you're calling architecture. And it does sort of cut both ways, it seems to me. It could be both a kind of public cleanup project that has real ecological value, but it could also just be a city management project around unruly bodies. So I felt like I sort of got that, the arc of acid plumbing took us to both places in some sense.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, like, it doesn't, architecture doesn't just control wetness. It controls the kind of social orders formed around that wetness. So, pissing, not pissing, it reorganizes the city in a kind of way. I mean, as you named it, access to bathrooms in itself, on its own, it's already a project of like social ordering through kind of, enacting in control and allowance and sort of allowing just so much. But putting the bathroom kind of far into, I don't know, like private businesses or,
God forbid there be a bathroom, because then guess what? Homeless people would use it, and what a disaster, right? So exactly, so all of those dynamics are sort of in play. I'd love to invite other people to jump in with discussion points, comments, questions, questions for Xavi about their practice.
Thank you so much. Xavi, I'm wondering, you were speaking a lot about like dismembering things, and I'm curious, in following up with what Jack was saying, of what we would be interested in building, of sort of, we know that kind of like cities aren't actually, it's the example Jack just provided, in which we actually provided bathrooms, homeless people would use them, and that would create, that's not what cities want. But I'm curious of sort of what you sort of think are sort of new ways that for cities of, steps we can take to sort of redesign them.
I tend to not sort of think about maybe the city as the kind of main agent, but and funny enough, in all this, I consider myself like a maker, like a designer, an architect. Like I'm 100% not a theorist. I'm barely an academic. Although I work within an academic institution, it's an academic institution that is more known for making and kind of creating like product, I guess, ultimately. So I do think a lot about making while I'm thinking about making too. But my interests tend to be not so much about making a building or an urbanism, but creating kind of like tools and kind of transferable, otherwise utilitarian kind of, or of utility to others. So the kit is one of the examples, kind of protocols of re-imaging or like sort of re-aestheticizing environments is another one. So just thinking about how we might create a kind of toolkit for making that it's not of the toolkit itself is of my making, but what it gets done with it, it's not mine. So and that spans the gamut of scale, although it has yet to hit the kind of like building scale. I think a lot more about kind of proliferation, like whether it's like of utility to many people as opposed to whether it's kind of like one thing that reflects my thinking, right? So it's not a sculpture to my thinking, but rather a tool for anybody to use. So that's where it's going. My making and my thinking is going in that direction.
My question is, what do you think about 3D technology and the usage of concrete as a material?
3D technology and the use of concrete as a material. So there's like 3D printing technology, which creates a kind of 3D printing concrete technology, which creates a kind of, the conversation there is a kind of problem of access to the tools, right? So this is something that architecture loves to talk about, like the crazy innovation of printing with concrete. Robots come to site, they kind of poop out this kind of concrete, and they kind of create this kind of instant kind of huts. But then the kind of problem there is that there's huge patents on the robots that create that. So ultimately it doesn't become a mass available tool. The products that creates are going to be commodified. There's going to be a kind of price tag on them because the tool is coveted and it's kind of safeguarded behind patents. So it won't be kind of accessible to everybody, at least initially. So then what that produces is essentially just expensive product, not like mass available sort of solution for housing or anything like that. But it's a kind of and then I interpret it through your question of 3D printing on concrete that way, but I don't know if you meant it that way.
It is very cheap to make. Concrete is very cheap material.
Yeah. Concrete is stuck between an idea of cheapness and the massive expense that it produces later on in its afterlife, right? So when it's qualified as cheap is nothing but it costs us a lot to undo kind of concrete and to kind of maintain it, and when it fails it also kind of costs kind of big time. So concrete is kind of stuck in this kind of place of, yes, it's cheap today, but very, very expensive sort of in its disassembly or in its kind of deterioration. So, a lot of the rubble, a lot of the kind of like problem and waste created by architecture, maybe even, upwards of 50% is concrete. The problems that ripple out from concrete. So, yeah, concrete needs to be rethought big time. It's
in favor of what kinds of materials?
I don't know if I can sort of suggest, like, it would have to be a different type of architecture because nothing can like live up to the sort of like strength and availability and cheapness of concrete. So we would just have to think about architecture differently. I mean, cross-laminated timber is, I can't believe I'm talking about this in a queer symposium, but cross-laminated timber is now producing buildings that are maybe, 10 stories high. So it's hitting a kind of versus concrete level.
But as you're implying, should we be building more than that? Should you be going above the 10 stories? So the fact that one would have to rethink architecture in relationship to the futurities that we're interested in, it's just so crucial.
Yeah, the fact that all innovations are tied to more and like making more or creating more of whatever is perhaps the first thing to question, I guess, to that point.
Do you have another question out there? Yeah.
I just wanted to ask about acid plumbing as a collaboration and how that came around in terms of, you were talking about the voice notes, but it seemed like the questions were edited out, so how it became this kind of architectural thought space that you travelled through together, and where they merged and how that became a visualization between the two of you.
Yeah, I mean, it emerged from a friendship. P-Steph and I were friends for a long time, and I kind of knew their thinking going into the Serpentine project and the kinds of like topics they were going to tackle, turning the building inside out, making it leak. So then I got invited to do a conference, and I invited them to kind of discuss some of those topics with me. They sent me sort of their thinking and some readings that they had in mind. I sent them some thinking and some readings that I had in mind, and then we just kind of exchanged notes from there. And I sort of created this colonoscopy of our thinking together, you know, over a kind of 3-day computer session.
So the visual aspect of it was also collaboration.
It wasn't so much, no. I always had this idea that I presented it to them as kind of like, hey, I want to do this, like, you know, completely woven together, like, yeah, colonoscopic, like, screensaver thing that is just like going through all of the kind of spaces that we're referring to in our conversation as if they were sort of seamless. But yeah, it was sort of, the visualizations are sort of my idea, and then I just kind of tagged on to the beautiful words from P-Steph to kind of give it what it is now.
Okay, we have, Maka has a question, and then I'll have one final question for you, and then we'll
I'll try to ask this very succinctly because it's such incredible work and so generative, so thank you so much. I guess you make me think a lot about the big box, you know, architectures and infrastructures, material infrastructures, and the way that those have been mapped onto digital infrastructures and all of the work that we're now doing, you know, shopping online and the kind of commodification of, you know, shopping, etc. So how can we think about, I guess I just want to talk to you more, maybe now and later, but how can we think about, you know, dismantling some of those spaces when, of course, they're full of, as John Miller calls them, of, you know, blood computing and all of the kind of violences that are behind the commodity chain itself, right? And you're, I think, elucidating all of those things and showing some way to, some way to, you know, open that conversation up. But I guess I'm just asking for more of the digital. How do you bring the digital in? How can we think about the digital and dismantling that aspect as well?
I mean, the digital facilitates proliferation, right? Like both for good or for bad. It makes it more sort of instantly available. So when it relates to commodities, that becomes an instant kind of multiplier of many things that are terrible. And, you know, on the other hand, when one wants to kind of make a kit accessible as a kind of alternative to you know, plywood, temporary, then thrown away kind of installation or something, then it becomes a kind of, it creates the access that would be so useful as you know, to propagate more like queer ideas in terms of kind of materiality. So yeah, I don't know. It's a double edge. We can talk about it more. It's in a way, like, to say I don't know is not to say, it's not avoiding the question. It's just I'm myself in sort of disbelief by the fact that we haven't gotten to an exhaustion about how we do things and about the amount of stuff that we have made. It almost feels like, to me, it feels like the heat right now. Like it just feels like how are we not like so constantly kind of annoyed and in disbelief of the kind of stuff that we've made. So the stoppage seems sort of natural in some way, or like pending, but I'm sort of waiting for it. So yeah, I don't know how we kind of stop things. It's just a matter of letting this kind of exhaustion, I guess, catch up with us, or hoping that it will catch up with us.
So a final question for you, and I'm borrowing here from Hans Ulrich Obrus, who yesterday asked the artist he was on stage with what I thought was a really nice sort of speculative question, which is, you know, do you have a project that you may never be able to realize, but that you can visualize? You know, like what, or a future project that you actually think you might be able to bring about that you're dreaming of?
Yeah, maybe. I'll tell you the ingredients. I think in the ingredients, there's like, it's rural. It's somewhat rural, and somehow Dynasty Handbag is involved. I love comedy, and or maybe not comedy. I think I love the sort of wildness of Dynasty Handbag. So it's somehow both of those things. I don't know what we're doing. I don't know what we're doing there, but hopefully it's going in that direction.
I can't wait. Sounds amazing.
Is that
yes.
what you were expecting?
Yes. No. But I want to just thank Xavi so much. You know, at a lot of these kinds of events, we think that theory and practice are two separate worlds that never are bridged, never come together. And I think in the work that Xavi has shared with us, we can see that there is a doing and thinking that goes hand in hand on behalf of practically intervening in the kinds of material changes that we're most invested in. So I just can't thank you enough, Xavi, for joining us today. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you.